Alrighty, hello everyone. We'll get started. And there we go. Okay, we're good to go.
Awesome.
So hi everyone, I'm Alexandra Marcacho, and I'm here presenting with my wonderful colleague, G. Selesky, and we're going to be talking about our student and consortia partnership and how we have developed a coordinated advocacy plan for hopefully sustainable OER funding in the future.
Fantastic. So just to go over an overview of what we'll be presenting on today. So we're just going to give a little bit of context as to both of our positions and our organizations and how we kind of came together, which gets us into the beginnings of open educational resources across the Atlantic and across Atlantic Canada, more specifically. Then we'll go over a little bit of a timeline, beginning with 2021, when the pilot project launched called Atlantic OER, how we contained and continued advocacy for funding over kind of a 3-year period, the launch of a new Atlantic OER service, and then finally we'll wrap up with our partnership today, where we stand, our current goals, and visions for the future of Atlantic OER.
Alrighty, so first I'll give a bit of context for CAUL. So CAUL is the Council of Atlantic Academic Libraries, and because we're a bilingual institution, le Conseil Bibliothèque Postsecondaire Atlantique. So we are a consortia for post-secondary institution libraries in Atlantic Canada. So that is, for folks maybe who aren't Canadian, that is the 4 provinces of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, PEI, and Newfoundland, and we represent 20 different member libraries in this area of Canada. Our focus has 3 different pillars. So first is licensing, cross-institutional collaboration, and of course OVR, which is the part that I oversee.
And so for Students Nova Scotia, we are a nonprofit advocacy group of student unions and association leaders from post-secondary, so both university and colleges institutions in Nova Scotia. So we represent only one of those 4 Atlantic provinces, but together we have 4 member student unions and associations, along with 1 informal observer member. We represent collectively 20,000 students, which for our province is a pretty good number and makes up about half of the university students, not including those who go to colleges. Finally, our organization, we have pillars based on improving the accessibility, affordability, and quality of post-secondary education across the province, as well as increasing the role of students in decision-making. So that includes within the university and the institution, as well as through government. Our organization is really based in policy development. So we're hearing student concerns directly from our members and then raising those through advocacy to our elected officials, particularly members of the Legislative Assembly and government. And we've built a reputation over the last, I believe, 21 years since we began as a nonprofit.
So OER first started at CAUL with something called the Open Textbook Working Group, which was founded and ran in the 2017 to 2018 academic year. So just as G mentioned that a lot of students' NS work is really driven by students and their student needs, we wanted to ensure that anything that was happening around open educational resources was strongly informed by what was actually happening at the institutions. So this working group was doing a lot of environmental scans of our 20 post-secondary institutions, our universities and colleges, seeing what was happening with open textbooks. Was there any use? What kind of interest there was? What kind of policies perhaps existed at these institutions, and that sort of thing. From there, using that information in 2018 and 2019, there was a new working group struck to develop an open textbooks roadmap. So this roadmap was developed by librarian representatives from some of our different member institutions who took what we had learned from that working group and really put together a plan of what OER could look like in Atlantic Canada and what kind of goals we could work toward and the goals we should be working towards to develop an OER service in Atlantic Canada. And based on that, in 2020, we saw the first time the word OER was used in our OER repository implementation working group, which built on all the work of the different folks who had participated in the working group and the roadmap before them. In 2020, again, as the title suggests, with the goal of making some sort of OER repository for Atlantic Canada, finding out where OER had been adopted, where it had been adapted, even created, and really highlighting the work that was already going on in the region.
So the beginnings of open educational resources for Students Nova Scotia is a little bit different, and I'm going to highlight ways that we got involved with CAL's work from the beginning of our advocacy. So initially, federal interest in open educational resources actually sparked the board of directors on our provincial level of students to explore opportunities for the province of Nova Scotia to get involved with open educational resources. So at the time, the executive director, who would have been my position at the time, back in 2019, got in contact with the executive director of CAL. Our board of directors, so our student leaders, had the opportunity to meet with CAL through a meeting during our Advocacy Week conference back in 2019. And the resulting action from that was that Students Nova Scotia was to receive a seat on the committee through CAL. And through that work, we ended up launching a working group to run a student campaign on campuses about a year later. So the importance of that kind of beginning and merging of the work was that we recognized that as students and student leaders, we are not necessarily subject matter experts. However, we were experts in student advocacy and raising awareness as for student issues and the needs that they had, particularly for accessibility and affordability, which was a huge reason why we wanted to push for open educational resources. So then in 2020, we opened a campaign focused on raising awareness across all 4 Atlantic provinces in collaboration with the other provincial student groups to be able to support the Atlantic OER pilot. And our student leaders actually went into different departments across their universities and presented not only to students by tabling them and asking how open educational resources and low cost or free textbooks would be of service to them, but also by presenting to faculty and staff on university campuses and colleges to be able to garner support for the work, to educate faculty about what this could provide for their classrooms. And as a result of that, we, alongside that campaign, also decided to advocate formally to the government in our pre-budget recommendation that the government of Nova Scotia invest formally into the Atlantic OER pilot. And this would be the first time of many that we would begin to push our government towards funding something that would really make a huge difference in the lives of students, both in Nova Scotia and across all 4 provinces.
So, G has mentioned the term Atlantic OER. That was the name that we formally gave to the service that launched on February 9th, 2021. And at the time, so keeping in mind, we had no official funding. Our OER service at this point was essentially funded through small bits of reserve funding, leftover funding we had from other pillars of our work at CAL. It was extremely small scale. We had a tiny little budget to be working with, but we wanted to show that this could be done, especially alongside the advocacy piece. We wanted to show that things could be done. We wanted to show a proof of concept so that as we kept advocating for funding, we could show like, okay, this is what we can do already with very little. Now imagine what we could do with more funding. So at the time when it launched in 2021, our service consisted of some basic Pressbooks infrastructure. At this point, we had actually a max that we could only publish and create 30 books a year for, again, 20 member institutions across Atlantic Canada, but we wanted to start with something, even if it wasn't a lot. We also offered small scale OER grants. So these became what is now known as the Atlantic OER Development Grant Program. At the time, this was 5 grants worth $2,000 each. And any educator that was affiliated with one of the member institutions could apply for a grant and receive funding to support either an adaptation or creation project around OER, with the caveat, of course, that this is an OER that would be used in a credit-bearing course at one of our member institutions. And we had another iteration of a committee struck up at this point, and that is our consortia-wide OER committee. So as G mentioned, because our partnership with Students NS was like very much strengthened at this point and really starting to become ongoing and constant, we wanted to make sure that students had a voice at the table. Our OER committee is made up of folks at our different member institutions, different librarians who have OER somewhere in their portfolio. And the idea is that these folks could work together to figure out how to implement a provincial or actually a regional wide service. And we wanted to make sure that our work still centered the student voice, that what students needed, just as Students-NS focused their goals around what students needed at the time, we wanted to make sure the work that we were doing around OER was still centered on the students, and we wanted that student voice represented on our OER committee. So we have a couple images from this time. This is this formal announcement from Students-NS from when they announced their support for the pilot that eventually became the Atlantic OER service. And this is our first ever 2021 grant recipient announcement from that year. So things were doable. It was a small run service at the time. My position actually did not exist. This work was fully done through the work of student advocates, through the work of the librarians at our member institutions coming together and collaborating on this committee, as well as support from CAL's executive director, who's Cynthia Holt, my boss, just working together to see what could be done if we put our heads together. Collaboration has been at the heart of the Atlantic OER service from the beginning, and it is the reason why it is as successful as it is today. It very much comes from not just like from the student voice and that advocacy piece. We knew we were a small service, and we knew that given the ambition that so many folks had in the Atlantic region, so much more could be done with funding.
And so that leads us really nicely into what Students Nova Scotia began to ask for in terms of more funding. And I put these 3 years in a row on screen to kind of emphasize how consistent these asks were. So part of Students Nova Scotia's work is that we host an annual conference where we meet with government to advocate and lobby them on certain issues. 3 years, actually this would have been 4 years in a row, standing out of our very short list of recommendations did we see Atlantic OER pilot coming into our formal recommendations to government with adjusted increases each year based on our consultations with CAL and the Atlantic OER pilot team to discuss what was going to be most beneficial and where we could really draw those numbers from. And so the primary increases were around supporting operational and platform costs, providing tiered faculty development grants so that faculty could get involved with the creation of these resources. And this kind of snowballed and continued over time as we had more and more data as to the cost that students were saving. You'll see a little clip at the bottom there is a screenshot from one of our advocacy documents that we bring with us to our lobby weeks to hand over to the government. At this period of time, it wasn't all easy. Obviously, asking for something year in, year out shows that there is not an immediate reception necessarily, but we really believe in sustainable and continued advocacy on important issues. And so pushback that we started to receive was particular to why Nova Scotia, specifically out of the 4 provinces, would fund a regional program, which is a pretty fair response from a government who only has a certain amount of money. But we continued to push and looked into other avenues to receive interest from other provinces as well. So in collaboration with our student unions and associations from the Atlantic provinces, we had them reach out to their councils for education on their government levels and ensuring that everybody was talking about this from the student perspective all of the time. It actually became a running joke. There were several people on the board of directors that were students that went as soon as they came into a room, government would kind of laugh and say, so what's on the table? I wonder if it's OER. And it really became something that was expected for us to continue to push on. And I think a result of that was, the continued funding that we're going to get into. So what ended up happening was we were able to gain attention from the Council of Atlantic Ministers for Education and Training, which we'll get into a little bit more later. And we also launched a campaign in the spring of March 2023 for Open Educational Week, which you'll see a little screenshot of there, where we were able to connect our work ongoing with more of the student testimonials and how this program could really have cross-provincial benefits for everyone through having more access and therefore more resources.
So, fun fact about this moment is that my first day on the job at CAL, Cynthia Holt and I get a call And we have been trying, and Cynthia had been trying for a long time to get a seat with the government, to get a chance to speak with the government. Really, Students Nova Scotia is the reason we were able to get in with the government. And so we were given an opportunity to submit a proposal for regional OER service to the four Atlantic provincial governments on my very first day on the job. And so our proposal contained a lot of different things, but the two key points is that we wanted improved infrastructure for publishing OER. We wanted to expand our grant program. We wanted to put me in this position full time to have someone overseeing this service and really working behind the scenes at all times to figure out how we could grow it. And truly, this was only possible due to the advocacy efforts that had been going on for years in collaboration between call and Students NS. We wouldn't have gotten that call without that. So in April 2024, we officially became funded by the four provincial governments through the Council of Atlantic Ministers for Education and Training. This is basically a coordinated group in the Atlantic region of the different provincial ministers for education and training to come together and talk about regional issues. So even though each of the four governments does individually pay a certain amount into our pilot program, CAMET's really there as the coordinator of that funding. This pilot's going to be for 3 years, so we're in the midst of our second year. And as a result of this funding, we've been able to upgrade Pressbooks. We've added in a lot of great features because we have instructors that don't just want to make, an open access textbook. They want to get creative. They want to add in those interactive elements. They want to use grade passback to have check-ins with their students to see how students are responding to materials with quizzes and the like. Our programs become a lot more robust. As G had mentioned, we were looking to a tiered funding system. So now we offer up to $7,000 for folks who are creating OER from scratch and up to $4,000 for folks who are looking to adapt an OER. We also have our staff librarian, which is me, and managing the service. We actually, this is a preview into something that we'll be launching in the next few weeks, but we do now have also a peer review program. So we facilitate peer reviews and help folks to get their OER peer reviewed. And finally, we have a new iteration of the OER committee that continues to change names, and it's now in its form as the OER Advisory Committee. So it's led by myself, and I work with folks, librarians across the Atlantic region who have OER in their portfolio to determine how this service can be best implemented at their institutions, how I can best support librarians who are on the ground at those institutions with implementing an OER service. And of course, we still have student representatives to ensure that we are always centering student needs in our goals as an OER service.
So on that OER advisory committee, we still have a Students Nova Scotia representative, as we just mentioned. That person, who's typically in the executive director role with the organization, has also acted as an adjudicator in the grant program. So actually having the ability to review the grant submissions and participate in the building of this work from the very ground up. We're also working to expand student involvement in other provinces beyond Students Nova Scotia. We're uniquely positioned here due to the ongoing and quite sustainable provincial student advocacy group that we have, but have made inroads with other student unions through their executive councils as well, even if there's not quite as strong of a provincial organization. And so that work is kind of ongoing. And I believe Alexandra is going to talk a little bit about the Maritime Student Congress screenshot that we have there, featuring a recent collaboration that was just this summer.
Yeah, so obviously our goals have had to change in how we're working together and what we're working towards because we have secured that initial funding. So our current goals as we organize and collaborate together have really been focusing on, first of all, increasing student involvement. So as you mentioned, there was a screenshot on the previous page. We got a chance to present at the Maritime Student Congress this past June. This is a conference that happens for student leaders across the Atlantic region to come together and just talk about issues to do with advocacy and student governance. So we were able to give a brief presentation to raise awareness about OER, the fact that this was an ongoing relationship we had with Students NS, and to show students who were interested how they could get involved in advocacy, how they might be interested in kind of becoming advocates for this work. And we gave them my contact info and also the current executive director, Ben Roberts' contact info. So since then, as a result of that, Students NS, along with student government leaders from some of our institutions, are working with me and we're collaborating together to do a new advocacy campaign with the idea really being that it's for students by students. I am there to provide them with the data and with the information that they would need to run such a campaign, with the infrastructure and support that they would need for that campaign. But our focus in that campaign is fully student driven based on what they know that they need on their campuses. And the other part is that we're advocating for sustainable funding. So the government, well, I hope they're not sick of hearing from us because they will be hearing more about Atlantic OER from Students NS in the future. As I mentioned, we're in the midst of just what is a pilot program. So this pilot is set to end in March 2027. And we would love to see that funding go beyond the 3 years. This is really meant to be a proof of concept that this is something worth investing in beyond 3 years. And student voices are going to be critical in securing long-term funding. I can anecdotally say from conversations that I have with provincial leaders now, they want to know that this isn't just effective based on data, but actual student testimonials. They want to hear from students that students are happy with what Atlantic OER is doing for them. So we're going to be needing those student voices to secure that long-term funding. And so again, something happening behind the scenes now is that we're working on coordinated advocacy campaign to go back to the provincial government and knock on their doors again so that we can get that funding extended past March 2027. So really, we hope you take away from this is that the relationship, like there's so much that we can gain and learn from one another. There's so much I've learned about working with the provincial government, just collaborating with G through this whole experience. And there's so much that we can do together. And that relationship just is going to change over time as your goals change. So our vision for the future is that we have that sustainable funding, that 2027 isn't the end for us. We're hoping that we can expand the service more. Something we've definitely been thinking about is the idea of an Atlantic Region OER repository or discovery layer of some sorts to help make those great OER projects that we've seen even more visible and accessible to folks so that we can also kind of increase adoption of OER.
And then finally, we just want to make sure that that partnership that we've built stays strong. I think, continuing that relationship can be challenging within small organizations where institutional memory is, a huge aspect of how the work gets done and to what level. So I think being able to transition from one folks to the next as people come in and out of these roles is paramount to the work itself. Alexandra's already been connected with my predecessor. And so I've moved formally out of the role of executive director with Students Nova Scotia. But through that relationship, they are continuing the partnership, and hopefully that will continue on for the future years as we bring in new students, new student advocacy groups, and really strengthen the work that we've already started.
All right, thanks everyone. We can take time for questions now, and I'll stop sharing my screen, but that's just my email if you want to know more from us.
Thank you, everyone. Seeing a lot of reactions. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. We'll stick around for questions. I do want to say, G, I really do miss working with you. So I'm glad that we were able to team up again together to do this presentation because really you were instrumental in helping me in the first few months when I first started because I really did end up having to hit the ground running with this.
Well, thank you. It's honestly quite nice to be dipping back into this work, even just through doing this presentation. So I appreciate you and all of your work because we became very quick friends under the circumstances at the beginning. So
Absolutely.
it looks
Okay.
like we might have a question.
Yeah, so someone's asked, do you have any practices or messaging that help with student leadership turnover? So I can speak a bit to it on my end, and G, if you want to speak to it on your end. But one thing that's big for us is I basically have what I call my OER 101 kind of introduction that I give on my end, and I do this in two parts. I never know with new student leaders and student advocates what kind of knowledge they're coming into this with. Because I've worked now with student union leaders who are fresh out of university, maybe haven't heard the term OER before. So I really make sure that um, I am keeping everything kind of meeting them where they're at with their OER journey, making sure to explain that kind of contextual information, the 101 basics if they need it. And then from there, I really explain a lot of what actually we went through today. So I get into a bit of the history. We don't go quite into the weeds as this, but I get into the history of OER in the Atlantic region and give them that contextual piece so that we can help them to figure out what they want their place to be in advocacy. Because that's going to depend, say, on the actual institution we're looking at and what's going on at their institution, what that institution's history has been. So they have me as a touch point, and the other part that we keep is that, as I mentioned, we have representative librarians who have OER as part of their portfolio. So I also connect students with that person because that individual is going to know a lot more about institutional context. So I think one key thing to take away from my end, at least, is that is kind of an ongoing relationship, but the relationship isn't just myself and a student. It's not very one-to-one. It is, we really do try to build a larger community of not just myself, but other librarians, other students, and make sure that students are in contact, not just with me, but that broader community that we have at Call.
Yeah, the